I pay on his,
Try to scare people away from X squats. Okay, welcome to the White House exercise. I'm Will. We're just going to kind of go over mechanisms of what constitutes health, and then we'll kind of go over how we can set things up in order to bring about those benefits. Okay, so we're going to kind of go over a quick.
To turn it on, yeah, you got this pulling thing on. Or it may need another battery.
It's this, Sylvia.
Oh, it's that, okay, good, because you got that on green.
Okay.
Okay. Carry on.
You stand there, or I can do next slide for you.
You're fine. Sure. Probably working now. Yeah, there we go. So we'll just kind of go over a quick primer of exercise used as a prescriptive method. So this is a tradition that's gone back thousands of years. So the first physician to prescribe exercise is Sushruta from India. So he's kind of the father of surgery. He was conducting rhinoplasties, 600 years before Christ, so BC there. So known as the first physician to prescribe exercise, he found it absolutely conducive to a better preservation of health. Interestingly, he discouraged active participation or like too much exercise because he found that could be, it might create premature death. So that's actually something that Huang Tua will get to in a little bit in China. But our second person here, Hippocrates, another heavy hitter in what we call the exercise as medicine movement. So 460 to 370 BCE, he found that the exercise would balance the humors being phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, and blood. So they found black bile to be kind of aligning with melancholia, things of that nature. He found that training would increase stature, bone mass, muscle mass, and endurance, and he found that exercise would warm, thin, and kind of balance the humors. We come to another Greek, Galen, who created the medical theory based on what are called the non-naturals. He was also a follower of the humoral theory, but the non-naturals are based on 6 things: sleep in a state of being awakened, air, food and drink, excretions, things like that. So that later falls out of favor. He also believed that training would cause thinning of the overall body. It would cause strengthening of muscles, increase muscle mass, and it would achieve an overall good condition. And then lastly, we have the famous Chinese physician Huang Tua, who was kind of alive during the Three Kingdoms period in China. So this is after the Han Dynasty has kind of fallen, and this is kind of when we have the Warring States period. So he prescribed moderate exercise for its yang effect, which he thought would enhance health. So he was an advocate of activities that mimic movements of animals, which he called frolics. And then he also had the belief that excess exercise would lead to death and disease states. So I think sometimes we see examples of soccer players or basketball players having sudden cardiac arrest. So maybe at that time they're noticing something similar. It's hard to say. But a little fun fact here is the rod of Asclepius is the Greek god of medicine. So this is actually what should be on most medical things instead of the caduceus. So this is actually the god staff of the god of healing. So it's kind of a fun thing. So I think the other rod is used just because it's more symmetrical, but this is actually what should happen on most medical emblems. Okay, so why should I exercise? You want to take a stab at that?
be healthy,
What does that mean, though?
to have a healthy lifestyle, to be able to have healthy muscles and so your heart stays healthy, and if you can contract diabetes if you're not healthy, and then you can get rid of it if you're healthy and you're staying on task.
Yeah, so that pretty much hits on, most of these. So, in terms of good muscle hygiene, strength and power. So, can anybody give me like some benefits of, strength and expression of power, or how that would be useful throughout the day?
Energy boost.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, rarely is it that I see people downstairs in PT or physiology there for a lack of strength, or excuse me, for too much strength. Usually it's some kind of musculoskeletal problem as a result of weakness, like a lot of lower back pain usually coincides with a lot of glute weakness. So, post-surgical outcomes are usually kind of helped by increased strength as well, reduced time of healing. So in addition, if we're talking about sport performance, rarely is it that someone is going to be, facing a detriment if they have too much strength. The only time that actually happens is if you have too much mass, and that's in some kind of running or jumping event where you're no longer able to kind of move your body weight quickly enough. Power. Power is something that is definitely important as we age. So one of the main things that goes away first during the aging process is your ability to, produce work quickly as a result of what's called denervative muscle atrophy. So as you're aging, you're having these alpha motor neurons, which are these main nerves that are kind of interacting with your muscles, kind of helping facilitate movement. Those begin to kind of atrophy. So those big muscle units in your type 2s start to not really function as well, and then they start to kind of transition to other muscle types, or they just atrophy entirely.
Scary.
So, improved metabolic functioning. We'll kind of get this on the next slide as well, but I kind of touched on it. We'll have improved use of lipids. We'll have improved blood sugar control. Your ability to use amino acids is going to change depending on how much weight training you're actually doing, things of that nature. Your cognition, your neuroplasticity is also going to change. So your ability of synapses to fire is actually improved with exercise. So we'll kind of touch on this when we talk about Alzheimer's or dementia, but what we're essentially doing is, when we exercise, is bathing your brain, especially your hippocampus, which is one of your main memory centers. We're pretty much creating a lot of extra of what is called vascular endothelial growth factor, as well as insulin-like growth factors, and we also have brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So all those things are helping make your synapses a little bit more robust, and we'll talk a little bit more about that next. We also have improved fat-free mass, so that's in addition to muscle, including bone, as well as its thickness. And we'll talk about that when we get to osteopenia. And then cardiovascular capacity or endurance, so your ability to maintain work for long periods of time. That is going to kind of influence your susceptibility to different kind of heart diseases. So in addition to having those different kind of growth factors, you're also getting things like nitric oxide, getting all these vasodilatory agents that are actually helping maintain good vascular health in your extremities. So you're going to be less susceptible to peripheral arterial disease. You're also going to help maintain an efficiently beating heart. So you'll have increases in what's called stroke volume. So that is the amount of blood that's pumped per beat. And that's usually an effect of having your blood actually handle a greater ability, or having a greater ability to stretch and fill with more blood following each beat. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so the importance of those things over the lifespan is a change in mortality risk. So can anybody give me what the actual recommendations are per week for exercise? You want to venture a guess?
week for exercise?
Yeah, how many minutes per
3
week?
times a week, at least,
Mm-hmm.
depending on.
Yeah, 150 minutes. That's for moderate intensity. How about for vigorous? So vigorous is about 75 minutes. So if you're able to meet those guidelines for moderate intensity exercise, you drop your mortality risk by 20%, your overall mortality risk, or your all-cause mortality. So if you meet your vigorous intensity need for the week, that drops your all-cause mortality risk by 19%. Okay, if you double or quadruple that, so we're getting into about 350 minutes, 450, 300 minutes, you drop it by 26 to 31% for moderate intensity exercise. If you do that for 2 to 4 times your vigorous intensity recommendation, you're dropping it by about a quarter. So there's not really any, like, you have nothing to lose by exercising is the main goal, or the main point of that. So, I mean, we'll kind of get into rectangularization a little bit, but the overall thing is the more you move, the better off you're going to be in the long run, because of all the things we're going to kind of talk about next. So maintenance of body composition. So the slow rate of osteopenia. So osteopenia is a reduction in your bone mineral density. It's followed up by osteoporosis, which is the bone mineral density of, I want to say, at least 2 standard deviations from what's normal. So that's typically, or it's thought to be, a result of increased reactive oxygen species. What those are is when you undergo aerobic metabolism, which is predominant energy system when we're at rest, kind of sitting, you're producing free radicals the whole time. So if you don't have the ability to buffer those, they are causing all sorts of issues. Okay, so all of your cells have mitochondria in them. So every cell is producing these free radicals to an extent, and they can actually start to disrupt different metabolic pathways within these tissues, bone, muscle, okay? And it starts to create these kind of, it starts to damage, this is gonna go off on a tangent a little bit, but it's gonna destruct chromosomes, okay? So you're getting damaged at the molecular level, and that builds up over time, and you start to see things like bone change, reduction in bone mass, reduction in muscle mass. So what happens when you start to exercise, especially when you're doing things like jumping, squatting? This is why we do hex squats. This is why we do box jumps. This is why we hop, why we run. Is you start to, in addition to say impacting the bone, you're also making the mitochondria within those tissues more robust. So you create this substance that's called superoxide dismutase, and that is a buffer of those free radicals. So you're,
Could you still do that after, even though you've had a broken bone in your, or an injury, that's still okay to do jumping?
jumping, we don't necessarily have to do in order to load your bone. But what is interesting is I found a study where, so in addition to like reducing mitochondrial dysfunction and stuff, you have these little things that are called wingless integration sites. They're called WNTs. So when you start exercising and you have movement that is, I'll use impactful in the context of landing, or we're, let's pretend I've loaded you with a hex squat. So if I load it the weight sufficiently, it'll actually cause your bone to kind of bend a little bit. And what happens is those sites start to be activated, and what happens is we'll start getting this little chemical cascade that tells the bone cells, your osteoblasts, to make more bony matrix along the side that's being bent. But what's interesting is it can also happen on the opposite side. So if I overload one leg, theoretically it will help the other side do the same thing. So I could load one foot, and we could potentially get the benefit on the side that's broken.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you want to try and hop, you can sometimes get a benefit on the opposite side. So we could probably just skip the side that's injured, but yeah.
Interesting.
But I mean, they're not doing it in every kind of population, so I mean, there's still some things that need to be elucidated, whether that's feasible for different people.
Got it.
So the main way, as far as what they used to teach, is called Wolff's Law, which is kind of what we just talked about. So you want to load bone to the extent that it's either being impacted or it's being bent, and it's going to cause the osteoblasts in order to kind of create a thicker bony material on the side that's being bent. Okay?
on the opposite side to where you jump, where you're hopping. You said it's on the opposite side if you jump, if you hop on your right leg. And those what do you call them, osteoblasts, and they're going to be activated in the other leg or in the leg you're jumping on.
So they're absolutely going to be activated in the leg that's undergoing
The
the
pressure.
impact. Yeah.
Okay.
But those WNTs, those winglet integration sites, they're also activated to an extent on the other limb.
Okay,
It's
so
building that up.
So,
Sylvia's saying if you had an injury on your left side,
mm,
if you activate your right side, you're getting some benefit. You might be able to hop on the injured side
potentially, Yeah.
potentially.
that's the main thing.
Yeah.
That's what's tough about science, right? It's never absolutely proven,
Black
but
and
it can be
white.
highly suggested, yeah.
Good.
So the same thing can kind of happen with muscle as well. So I don't want to get too much into neuroanatomy, but I mean, within your brain, you have what's called a pyramidal decussation. So you can kind of do the same thing with muscle, where if you have an injured side, you can overflow train one side, and because of this change in your corticospinal tract, which is kind of going from your motor cortex to your muscle, it crosses over, and then, however, it's not a completely clean cross, so you still have fibers that can come down the same side. So you can still get benefit on the opposite end. So, anyway, so we can use different modes of activity. We can do jumps, hops, what have you, and then we can kind of attenuate. Like, osteopenia, the breakdown of bone it's inevitable. It's going to happen, but you can slow it down by moving as much as possible with a clear goal in mind of, okay, I need to bend the bone, I need to impact it, and that's why Jen is doing so many jumps. Okay, so the same kind of principle here with sarcopenia. You're going to undergo a variety of changes as you age. This is just kind of how it is. Actually, before I continue, there's a difficult or a tough thing regarding this, especially for women due to menopause. So the lack of estrogen is going to impact you a bit more substantially. So estrogen being protective of bone. So once those levels start to change, I mean, you still have estradiol, estradiol, things like that, but overall you start to see a change after about the 5th decade of life. But I mean, I'm sure you found different information regarding this, but from what I've seen in meta-analyses, I haven't noticed or come across anything that shows that exogenous ingestion of estrogen is helpful.
I don't think it does a lot. In
Yeah.
fact, they're concerned the risk, even if it's a minimal benefit for reducing sarcopenia, reducing muscle loss, the risk of estrogen in that instance is probably more than actually the benefit of it.
Okay.
I'm not saying someone doesn't ever need estrogen.
Yeah.
That would not be a reason that you would start.
I mean, that's kind of just an unfortunate thing. But I mean, what's tough, like men don't have the same kind of drop off with their hormone levels. I mean, T will obviously decline with age, but you don't necessarily see the same kind of bony change. And what's also kind of annoying to me is there have been 12 and 16-week studies of women, like ages 60, 70, 80, undergoing 12 to 16 weeks of jump studies, not seeing a very large change, if any change in bone mineral density. But you have the same age group of men, and it will go up. It's like,
That's not fair.
yeah, it's not. Sarcopenia, yeah, kind of our muscle dysfunction over time, and also a result of mitochondrial dysfunction. We kind of touched already on trying to maintain as much mass as possible, trying to maintain power over time, just so we don't have as much denervative muscle atrophy. We'll kind of touch on this a little bit later when we get into kind of our little worksheets that are in front, but the main thing with this is you want to try and create as much mass as you possibly can. So if you want to try and think about this, then once our lateralization slide is coming up, but want to try and think about this as a peak that you can kind of fall from, as odd as that sounds, where you want to have as much mass and strength as you can, so you have a large reservoir that you can kind of take from as you age. So just try and fill the cup as much as you can with strength or with bone mineral density. So another importance here is maintenance of metabolic functioning. So a big thing that happens, and this is typically what I do with patients downstairs, even though they might not know it, is I try and use what's called adenosine monophosphokinase. So that is a little, so a kinase, let me back up, is just a little molecule that moves a phosphate from one molecule to another. So what I'm doing is I'm putting people under enough stress that they start to create more of this molecule. So when you exercise, you're breaking down what's called ATP. Okay, if you break it down fast enough, you get from ATP to ADP, and you also make AMP, adenosine monophosphate. So this is why you're doing sprints sometimes, especially on the bike. So I'm trying to break energy down so quickly that, you know, she has to use her faster metabolic pathways. So what happens is, if I can make that happen fast enough, I have enough AMP, the AMPK gets activated, and it's a very potent stimulator for mitochondrial synthesis, and mitochondria being kind of the main thing that's causing a lot of, especially if it's not working properly, is causing the problems with your bones and your muscles over time. So what happens is, I don't have an illustration of this because you have lines and bubbles going everywhere, and it's a nightmare to try to navigate. But when you have enough AMPK, you create what's called, or you upregulate what's called PGC1. Okay, this is when it kind of gets into biochemistry and epigenetics and stuff. Okay.
In layman's terms.
Yeah, so you go from AMPK to this other molecule that is directly responsible for making more mitochondria. Okay, so that's one of the benefits of like long distance running. You have a greater mitochondrial volume. Okay, so that allows you to use oxidative metabolism more easily. You can handle more lactate or more pyruvate and things like that, the metabolic byproducts. Okay, now if you get through the PGC, you have what's called, there's more, it's called FNDC, yeah. And what FNDC does is make what's called irisin. So irisin is an exerkine, which is, I mean, they're pretty much moieties, which a moiety is just like a portion of another molecule. So if you want to get into biochemistry, which no one wants in here to do, so you make this irisin, and irisin is one of the, for my money, one of the most important little exerkines that's in the body. So it will cause what's called beiging of your white adipose tissue. So it'll make it more metabolically active. So it will actually help burn white fat. So if you can get enough irisin, you're now creating a positive feedback loop where you're now able to burn fat more easily. So in addition to that, it's also helping with glucose intake. So what it's thought to do is going to be kind of another thing you have to kind of let me your ears for a second. So within muscle, there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just lifting weights. So what goes into glucose uptake, this is for all the nerds in the room, you have what is called a GLUT4 receptor, okay? So they sit in these little vesicles within your muscle. So when you have, muscle contractions, things of that nature, or irisin within your bloodstream, these will start to move towards the surface area or the surface of your muscle. They open and allow essentially glucose to come into your cells. So this is like an insulin independent process. Okay. So you can train your body to become more receptive to glucose while having more circulating irisin. Yeah. Yeah, and another thing is it also helps with the breakdown of fat. So in addition to helping your fat burn by adipose tissue, you're also making lipolysis, the breaking down of fat into its constituents, fatty acids, glycerols, makes that process faster. So when I'm doing downstairs with people that have diabetes, dyslipidemia, things like that, and I'm trying to put them into this positive feedback state so their body becomes more efficient at all these processes. That's kind of the main goal of how I approach my job. So
Okay.
instead of relying on heart rates to do things, I'm trying to set up the cells in order to create an environment where things are working much faster.
Huh.
Yeah, so it's just you're moving weights quickly as well as sprints, and then it has a bunch of other kind of metabolic effects. But that could be a quarter's worth of information. Right. So that's maintenance of metabolic functioning. So the risk of dementia. So kind of touching back on your synapses, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. A big thing to kind of keep in mind, if you have a pen, write this down, is long-term potentiation. So I want you to think of your neurons kind of as two phones that have, let's say, like a crappy cell signal. So we're talking about muscle physiology. Potentiation refers to a process where you undergo a certain type of contraction, and that creates kind of phenomenon where each successive contraction becomes stronger. So in the case of like cognition, this potentiation is allowing the connection between your neurons or the synapses to become more acute, or essentially strengthens them. So the more times you are using a given synapse, the clearer your signal gets between the two phones. That's essentially it. And that's kind of what is causing short-term and long-term memory. Yeah. So if we talk about our BDNF and our vascular growth factor, you're able to create kind of more vessels around these neurons, and you're creating more branches from each neuron so you can create more synapses. So a similar thing happens with the positive feedback. So you're able to kind of generate more areas of connection as well as creating a clearer signal between each connection. So your ability to kind of maintain your cognition as you age is vastly improved. Does that make sense? Kind of?
So that, not only allowing the connections between the neurons to be more, sending messages, but it also increases the branching of the dendrites?
Yeah.
Okay, and what does that do? That just creates more of the connection, more connections, neuro connections.
Exactly.
So that you're getting more power to your brain and your body, right?
That's a way of thinking about it, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
And again, what's interesting about the neurons too is, I mean, they're undergoing the same kind of metabolic thing as well, where over time they're beginning to fray. So you have what are called these little tau proteins that maintain, the structure of the tubule that kind of allows the cell to grow, that neuron.
Mm-hmm.
So those tau proteins, if that nerve starts to kind of break apart, they'll start making these little tangles called neurofibrillary tangles, and those are one of the hallmarks of dementia. So if you're able to exercise, you're reducing inflammation, that mitochondrial issue, and you're maintaining the integrity of those tau proteins, so you're actually slowing that down as well. So structurally, it's creating quite a few benefits for you in slowing down really ravaging processes in your brain. So, I mean, again, there's not really a downside to exercising as long as you're doing it safely, which is kind of what we're going to cover in a little bit. Does that all make sense? Okay. So this is kind of a way to visualize it. So if you're able to maintain health, you're going to live much longer than someone would say. This could be kind of a curve representing bone mineral density. It could be cognition. This could be muscular health. So there's going to be a detriment. It's inevitable. It's going to happen to all of us. Like your muscle and your bone break down at a rate of like 1 to 4% per year after your third decade, regardless of who you are. The main thing is just to try and maintain as best you can. So you want to start from a position where you've essentially maximized what you can get, so that taper has a bigger place to fall from. Does that make sense? So let's say if I didn't really do much of anything, wasn't active as a kid. I didn't run, I didn't lift weights, I didn't eat very well. My starting point's here, so my quality of life is not gonna be as good as someone who say, if I was just eating right, I was eating nothing but vegetables, considering heart health there, we're running constantly. I'm engaging in different kind of extracurricular activities, I'm reading constantly, doing Sudoku, whatever you want to do. So helping out with your plasticity. Potentially, and on average, you're gonna live quite a bit longer. That's the overall point there. Okay, so kind of why we're here is, how do I exercise? There's a lot of different ways to go about it. I mean, there's not necessarily a wrong way to do it. It kind of depends on what your taste is. I have ADD pretty badly, so I like to do a little bit of everything, right? So we have aerobic exercise, and that's pretty much anything that's cyclic and maintains an elevated heart rate. There's weight training, there's circuit training, and then there's kind of more of a mixed method. And there's also play. Playing's hugely important. I play a couple times a week, and I play dodgeball and I play volleyball. Okay, so here's some basic programming principles. I'd write these down, or you can take a screenshot if that works. So the main thing here is kind of determine goals. These are kind of a general guideline for endurance, hypertrophy, strength, and power. And this is typically the if you're going through what's called periodization, this is usually the typical timeline that this is undertaken. So you have your endurance first, your endurance base, then you kind of work on hypertrophy, building more muscle mass. Then you start to develop more strength because you change the cross-sectional area of your muscle, and then you try to develop that strength, and then you try to exert it as quickly as possible, which is work divided by time, power. Okay.
What's the percent?
So that refers to your one repetition maximum. So let's say we did a bench press of 50 pounds, we'd be going 60% of 50.
Say that again. I'm not quite sure what the percentage represents.
So if we had your maximum weight you could push, it'd be 60% of that. So 60% is kind of,
60% of the maximum.
yeah. So that'd be, 15-ish reps. So if we're trying to build endurance, we're going from 15 reps to about 25. So this is going to cause a different endocrine response or a hormonal response in your body than the things below it, okay? So if we're trying to generate hypertrophy, those reps are now changing, okay? We're going to use a much higher percent of your one repetition maximum. And we're gonna keep your rest periods between 45 and 90 seconds. That's been shown to kind of change things like growth factors and testosterone levels the most. And then same thing with strength. Given that that's at such a high intensity, those rest periods are gonna be quite a bit longer, like 1 to 5 minutes.
Okay.
Yep.
Is that kind of like a general ballpark of all ages to do that
For
many
the most
reps?
part, yeah. And, but that's not to say,
Got some work to do.
that's not to say that you have to do that many reps in order to develop strength though. So depending on where you start, let's say you have an exercise in a couple of years, right? You're gonna see benefits just from doing the top.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so, I mean,
Cool. Yeah.
you can do it. Yeah, you're gonna be fine. So, so you can start with one set there and you're gonna see benefits for a couple of weeks, and then it's just more just kind of a guideline, so. That makes sense? Okay, so main programming principles just for today, I mean, these are all subject to change, and it's gonna depend on the health status of the person, their activity level, if they're playing a sport. I mean, if they're an amputee, that's gonna change things. If they have certain metabolic conditions, that's gonna kind of change how hard I can push them. Or if there's some kind of vascular problem, we're probably not gonna do anywhere near 87%, because I don't wanna cause any kind of bleed or anything like that. Okay, so main thing is determine what your goal is. If you wanna have greater endurance, we're probably gonna be doing more reps. If you wanna be stronger, we're gonna be kind of using one of these two middle categories. If you wanna develop power, we're gonna need to go through a couple different phases first, and then we can get right to it. But that's not to say that we can't include some of these things in our programming, and we'll get to that in a second. But we wanna have your muscles in a position to where they can actually handle the stress, because we don't want injury. That's the main thing. Okay. So after you determine your goal, we're going to try and get your baseline. So we'll have some kind of assessment. So if we're doing like distance running, I typically have people run a mile, then rest for a certain number of minutes, run another mile, and we'll get an average, and then we'll start kind of progressing from there. Okay. And then you want to have some kind of timeline, make it realistic. That's kind of it. So that's kind of the basic paradigm here, and then based on progression, we have kind of these really simple rules. I mean, these can be as complex as you want, but there's a 2-for-2 rule that we'll go over today. You have a 10% rule. I use that mostly for like distance running. So let's say if you run a mile, or let's say you run for 20 minutes, the next week or the next session, you would just increase the time or the distance by 10%. So there's also called step loading. So every time you come to the gym, if you're doing squats, you would have a certain step weight. So let's say if we're doing squats, every time you come in, I'm going to add 5 pounds to the bar. And then we also have what's called wave loading. That's based more on percentages. So let's say you come in for a week, we're going to go at different intervals throughout the week, 60, 70, 75%, and that's your wave. Okay. The next week, the wave will increase. We will increase next week, etc. While we deload, and then we'll kind of do the same thing. Okay, so the main rules is you typically want to do your big muscle groups first, or your big, your most stressful movements like squats, or if you're doing things like cleans, snatches, those typically need to come first because they require the most motor coordination. So you don't want to get too tired before you attempt them, otherwise things aren't going to be recruited as quickly as they need to be, and then sometimes an injury can occur. Or you can kind of go the opposite way and do the weakest muscles first. So for me, I have a lot of knee issues because the inside of my thigh is kind of weak, so I always work these muscles first. Or given that a VMO sometimes needs to have everything around it be weakened, I'll put it in a state of pre-fatigue and then I'll work it, and then I'll go through the rest of my exercises. So depending on what you want to work on, that will also determine the order you need to kind of prescribe things. Following me so far? Okay. Okay, so we can kind of look at this through the lens of AMPK. So this is part of a cycling thing I put together. So this is actually based on the work of Cal Dietz, who's the strength coach for University of Minnesota. So this is a glycolytic method. So you're trying to generate as much hydrogen and lactate as you can. So we're trying to create buffering within your cells. So for this, it's also going to help increase endurance. So what we're doing is doing a series of sprints followed by about 40 seconds of rest. So we're not allowing you to completely recover, so you're generating more and more metabolic byproduct. And then after that, I'll let you rest for a couple minutes. Okay? So you're going through a series of exercises where you're not allowed to let your body relax, let's put it that way. And then I'll give you some time between these blocks in order to kind of like flush everything out, and then we're going to go through that for a few cycles. So after a series of weeks, your body now has a greater ability to kind of handle things like lactate and hydrogen. So let's say if you can use this if we're cycling like this gentleman is, let's say if you're driving or riding up a hill and you experience that really intense burning in your quadriceps, we can use a method like this to help condition your quads in order to handle that kind of stress. That's essentially why it's done. So you can do that for running, you can do it for swimming. The mode doesn't really matter. Okay? So here's a different way of training your cardiovascular system. So this is more so how I kind of go about running, because I dislike distance. I kind of prefer this sort of thing. But so let's say we're just a runner. So this is using a couple different metabolic pathways here. So we have a sprint day, so we're working those big muscle groups. We're getting to a point where we can use AMPK. Okay? So we're just kind of keeping up by it's week 1. We're just doing 2 sets of like 3 40-meter runs. We're booking it, you've already warmed up, everything's good to go. We're just doing a few sprints, calling it good. You know, don't want to tire out your nervous system too much because we still have the rest of the week to go. Okay. So those are maximal, we'll rest, and then we're gonna have a long, slow duration day. Show that you get the pretty much the most irisin upregulation if you stay within 60 to 85% of your heart rate max. So we're gonna kind of keep within that zone. It's also good for VO2 development. We're gonna do that for 20 minutes in this hypothetical scenario. And then the next day, since this isn't too stressful for your muscle, we're also gonna do some tempo runs the next day. So this says 110%. That means 110% of, say, your race pace. So let's say I had you do those 2-mile runs for your baseline, and we found that you ran the mile in 8 minutes. Okay, so we're going to take.
Yeah.
So instead of having you run repeatedly at that 8-minute pace, I'm going to make you do it. You know, what's 10% of? Run it like a fraction of a minute faster than that. I want to get you accustomed to a speed that's faster than the race pace, okay? So once we've kind of gone through a couple of cycles of conditioning, what your previous mile time was is not going to feel nearly as stressful the next time we perform the assessment. Okay, so we get a tempo day, we're going to rest, and then we'll just finish off with another long, slow duration day, okay? And then the next week is just showing either a change in the overall volume or the 10% rule for the time, okay? So instead of performing 2 to 3 sprints, we're gonna go 2 to 4, and also gonna increase the distance just a little bit. Okay, we're gonna go 10% of 20 minutes, we're gonna go for 22. Okay, and then instead of doing 5 to 6 rounds, we're going to do it's about 8 or so. So 10, 12. Okay, so we increase the total duration. So instead of 12 minutes, we're just adding an extra minute at 13. So it's just a subtle way of progressing the total time you're spending running at a faster tempo. Okay, and then the second LSD run is the same as earlier in the week. Okay, so it's just different ways of playing around with very specific variables in a way that's not too stressful. So you want to progressively overload, but not push yourself so hard that you get tendonitis. That's typically what happens to me, especially in my right leg.
What do you recommend in terms of stretching pre, post?
Okay.
What are your thoughts there?
So I'm going to do run specific things. So let's say if I'm going to go for a jog, I'm going to start slowly, and then I'm going to progressively pick up speed just to kind of make sure my hip flexors are working, my glutes are working, my Achilles is, stretching, shortening, storing like it should. I could start with a march first. I typically have a couple bands with me, so I could do my monster walks. You're a professional at monster walks now. So it's typically just a band around my legs, and I'll be in a squatted position. So let's say if I'm running, this position is not too different from this one, which is where I'm pushing from. So I'll load my glutes this way. I'll just do, probably 20 steps forward, 20 steps back. I'll do just some easy marches with arm action, and then I'll just start to pick up the pace. I'll do a series of jogs, and then just try and get my heart rate going, generate heat in my muscle, get what's called a Q10 effect. So you have a certain kind of temperature gradient. It's usually, say, probably 100 some degrees, where all the muscles in your, or the enzymes in your muscles start to activate a little bit more rapidly, more efficient. So you're trying to undergo that process, get everything limber, okay? And then you can get into your run, right? And then cooling or cooling down, I'll kind of just save my jog, I'll just walk. That's pretty much it. I just need my heart rate to come back down. But I also kind of combine that with diaphragmatic breathing, just breathe into your stomach, completely exhale. Do that for a few minutes. Activate your parasympathetic nerve, your vagus nerve, help your heart rate come down. Okay. So weight training. This is another kind of method to generate fitness. So I try to have people start with a foam roll, do some kind of aerobic activity. This method here is kind of a hodgepodge of what Exos does. I'm a member of Exos. They kind of do a lot of corporate wellness stuff. So we're working the glute complex. We're doing monster walks, internal, external rotation of the hip. We're doing some side stepping, and then we're doing a lot of hip mobility. So toe touches, world's greatest stretch, T-walks and knee cradles. So we're just here, coming up, getting hamstrings and glutes ready. And we're doing marches and low skips. So those would be, low skip in particular would be good for, prior to a run. And then in this example right here, we're doing something that's pretty conducive to generating the osteoprotective movements. So we're loading the bone as well as making it experience impact. Okay, so having you barbell squat as well as jump. So this is actually a pretty good example of that potentiation we're talking about, because if you can load the barbell squat to like 80% of your max, it actually makes jumping easier because those motor units are already recruited. You actually notice that you jump a little bit higher. And then for that, we just have kind of a hypertrophy sequence for having you squat. We're doing bench pressing, leg press, dips. So we're just working your glutes and your pecs. So it's a pretty time efficient way of going about exercising as well. Okay, then we have circuit training. Again, Jennifer's familiar with this. So I like to break things down this way. I'll give you 3 or 4 exercise blocks. So we'll just have, this is kind of arbitrarily put together. So I put things as in categories of upper, core, and lower. So any kind of multi-joint upper extremity exercise would go on that block. That can be a bench press, that can be an overhead press, it can be a dip, it can be whatever you want. Okay, you can follow that up with kind of any core exercise you want it to be. That can be Russian twist slams. Okay. It could be mountain climbers, it could be crunches, it could be whatever you want. And then you follow that up with the lower extremity exercise. I just put deadlifts for this one. They're my favorite. I'm biased. Okay, and then I like to follow that up with some kind of conditioning exercise to really make your heart rate go back up.
All the way.
Yep, just battling ropes. And the same thing down here. It's just upper, core, and lower, and then it's just a really simple way of going about that. Okay, and then here's kind of a mixed method of doing those things. So here's how we can integrate power into, let's say, you're new to exercise and we're kind of jumping ahead and incorporating power development into it, okay, instead of going through like a whole periodized training cycle. So we would start the session off with just some medicine ball throws. Those could be slams, those could be scoop throws, kind of throw it as high as you can. Okay, it could be throwing a ball against the wall as hard as you can. We're just trying to make your body move as quickly as possible and trying to recruit your muscles as quickly as possible, and that's going to generate power. Okay, and then we'll follow it up with some kind of jump exercise to work the lower body. We'll just kind of cycle through those after a couple minutes of rest each. And then kind of a similar thing. We're going to go, the way this is set up, we're kind of going heavier in the first box here, first 2 boxes. So we're doing a glute and quadricep specific exercise followed by a glute and hamstring specific exercise. So we're working in front of your leg for 3 sets, in this block and then working the back of your leg. Okay, so we're following that up with a row and then a press. Second block is followed by a press and a row, or a lat pull, excuse me. So within the first two blocks, you've already worked pretty much every major muscle group in your body. So this is another really time-efficient way of doing this. Okay, and then third block is kind of optional depending on how much time you have. And then I follow that with core circuit. So the core is done last, is because I want you to be able to brace for all these really intense exercises. If your abdomen or the muscles of your trunk are already too tired, we're going to put your back in a bad position to perform the movement. Does that make sense? Okay. So everything kind of has fairly specific order in order for you not to experience any kind of injury or be too tired to get to the end of it. Okay. So this is kind of my preferred way of going about things, just because I can manage strength, power, and endurance, as well as with this conditioning, maintain a really high heart rate. Okay.
And you do this all in how long?
So
An hour?
yeah, about. So while you're recovering from this exercise, you're already getting through these by the time you're done. So for this in particular, this is really taxing on your quadriceps, which is what I want. So I'm getting kind of a metabolic training of my quads because they're not being completely recovered. So after the bike sprint, I'm still feeling kind of that burn in my legs and then going right back to a heavy squat. So I'm kind of creating a capacity to move when things are a little bit acidic in my legs. Yeah. So you can totally change that. You can make that alactic by shortening the duration of the sprint, and then that's, you're now kind of in a realm of creating more power within that muscle group. Okay. So let's say, for example, if you wanted to progress weight, an easy way to do it is, again, our 2-for-2 rule. So let's say, for example, within this block here, we had a squat that was 145 pounds. Okay, I would have, let's see if I could extend the number of reps I did in a set twice in a row. The next week, I would bump the weight up. Does that make sense? So this is kind of a rudimentary way of doing this. You can also look at movement velocity. That takes a little bit of time to develop your eye to see that, but this is kind of an easy way of going about, easy and safe.
Okay, how do you know what weight to start at?
I use what's called RPE, so how you perceive the weight. So let's say if I give you 10 pounds and I ask you 1 to 10 how difficult that is, and you say it's a 2, it's like, okay, let's try 15, and then that jumps to a 6. Good.
Okay, because I'm seeing 145 pounds, is that what you're saying?
So,
Oh.
That's your baseline, Sylvia.
let's say we had,
On a hex squat, I do 152 pounds.
Wow. Jeez, what a woman.
And on a leg press, I'm up to about, I think it is now 320.
No
Both
kidding.
legs, yeah.
What'd you start at?
I started out at 50 pounds on the leg press, and now I'm up to 360.
That's in a year.
How
And
long
that's
have
in a
you
year.
been doing it?
Wow.
And I've been doing it almost, I'll be in the program almost a year. Doing the program a year in February.
Woo! Woo! Awesome.
Yeah, good for you.
I was doing it 3 days a week, now I'm down to 2 days a week. Keeping her up.
Yeah.
so let's say we're at 10 pounds, and we do that for 2 by 10. You're able to get 10 pounds, 2 by 12 for two sessions,
Okay,
and then maybe go to like 12 and a half.
you have 2 pounds.
Absolutely. We're just making subtle changes if you can handle the weight at least twice, a couple sessions, a couple consecutive sessions. Ooh, my laptop died.
Oh, there it goes, it's back.
Okay. So now we're just gonna get to the point where we kind of build your own. Who has a specific goal in mind?
What's that?
So we're just gonna kind of go through one of the examples here. So kind of keeping in mind these principles here, let's call out a single goal and we'll all kind of work through it together.
Endurance?
Upper body strength.
Upper body strength, okay. Okay, so which one are you going with?
Let's do,
Okay, hypertrophy. Going through the middle here. So we're thinking about the pec, your delt complex, and then your triceps. Do we want to do a big movement first, multi-joint? What comes to mind?
shoulder.
Oh, yeah, shoulder. What kind of movement though? Oh, you're good.
Barbell.
Yeah.
Let's do some bench press.
Yeah, so bench press, let's go ahead and put that on the top. That's usually the most stressful one. And then, so hypothetically, how long has this person been training, or what are they doing? Where are they coming from?
Starting from scratch.
Okay, let's go like a single set of 8. I've made this mistake so many times, going right to 2 sets, and it bites me every time. Okay, so let's think about what else is going on. So if we're pressing, we're doing a bench press, we're having a lot of other muscles around the shoulder work, so we're also getting some serratus. We're also having shoulder or muscles in the back of my arm work. Okay, we have my traps, my lats are working, serratus, okay, my rhomboids to an extent. So let's throw a little bit of a back exercise in there.
Where would you put those on your sheets? Like this, for the circuit, total body, or strength?
Let's put it on the screen.
Here's actually ones that say hypertrophy, pec, delt, tri, if you want that.
Thanks.
Yeah, so we want to try and work the back a little bit. So what movement comes to mind there? So we want something that's going to be, it's going to utilize some kind of pause probably.
Row.
Yeah, row.
Body strength.
So slot number 2, let's put a row in. Let's put a row, parenthesis, isometric, parenthesis. Okay,
I need to build a little ball.
now a bench press is it's known as a horizontal push. So I like to use vertical as well. So what is another movement we could do that's more than 2 joints, that is using your pecs and your deltoids, that is pushing upward? Yeah, we could do an overhead press. So let's put that in the third box. The same thing, just go about a single set. Put that one for probably 10 reps. So the angle of the exercise is going to make things a little bit more challenging. If we're going up overhead, the pec is going to be used to the same extent as the push is, so we're going to get more of an anterior delt.
And that has no weights on it? I mean, an overhead press is just what,
Let's
just a
wait.
bar?
Oh yeah, we're waiting. So that could be dumbbells, that could be a kettlebell, it could be, yeah, it could be,
What
it's
is
right here.
theirs?
Yeah, it's right here.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so what was the first one real fast?
The bench press,
Bench press
and after that we added a row with a pause.
and a row.
Okay, so we'll just do a couple more upper extremity movements and then we'll add some core stuff just because I don't want it neglected. So we have here. Let's work the tricep a little bit. What's a good movement you think? So tricep responsible for bringing the arm back as well as pushing from behind you.
And dumbbell?
You can do a tricep extension. Yeah,
Bench dips.
bench dips. Yeah, let's throw some bench dips on there.
Weight, you used weights, I think, when I was doing with the ladies.
Yeah, and then our last kind of tricep extension, we could do last tricep exercise, we can do the extension. So from the top, we have bench press, row, overhead press, bench dip, tricep extension. That's a pretty good arm workout already.
What's a bench press?
So we're supine, pressing.
Oh, okay, you're laying down. Okay.
Yeah. You also do a machine chest press, it's going to do the same thing essentially. and then just for fun, we'll add a couple core exercises to it, so that's gonna come down more so to taste, like, figuring out what you feel like you're weakest in. So for me, since I enjoy playing dodgeball, I try to make my rotational strength as high as I can. So I lean more towards that. But I should be doing more planking because my back tends to kind of, I get a little bit of an anterior tilt when I'm squatting. So I'm not staying very rigid here. So I should do more planking. Or I should do more overhead squatting just to kind of make sure everything stays stiff.
So is there a different way you could still work those without the twist? I would have had a back injury and I was always told after that not to twist.
Okay, we can do anti-rotation. So we could have something that's trying to rotate you and then you resist it. So, yeah.
Oh.
You kind of work the opposite way. Or you can make that stability in the spot that's not supposed to rotate and then something below it can move. But we have a physiatrist. Ask him.
You know, a lot depends. It really depends on what the injury is and the time frame from it. And then it's also maintaining the appropriate posture as well. So it really gets people to when you're bending and twisting often, and then actually lifting as well. And so, let's see, you had a history of herniated disc. That you may want to avoid, but you might be able to tolerate a twist like this. It was pen. It really depends on what the injury was.
Yeah, that's what it was. It was herniated.
Yeah, and you probably could do this, I'm guessing. You would just start out really low, but you wouldn't want to be leaning forward and then twisting, and that's when it's going to really put a lot of pressure in. You won't probably put as much force in this one.
So let's say if I had you downstairs, we could do a pale-off press and then we could add a side step to it. So we're here, a band is trying to rotate you, so you're maintaining rigidity, so your obliques are activated, right? And then as I have you step, now you've lost your basic support, so everything else now has to brace a little bit more. You regain stability, lose stability, and everything else is kind of, everything's co-activating and kind of help maintain integrity. Okay, so let's,
Sounds good.
because I'm lazy, we can put plank there, that'll be on me, all right?
You mean you'll do the plank?
Yeah, I'll.
For
Just
me?
don't do it on the wall.
Yeah. Okay, plank, what's something that someone has an issue with core
My
wise?
toe, I don't think I'd be able to do planks because I can't put any
Okay,
weight on my big toe.
all right, for you, we could do like a seated reverse crunch where you're stationary, but you're bringing your knees towards your chest.
Oh.
Yeah, let's put that on there. That's kind of the same thing, we're working the rectus side balance a little bit, hip flexors to an extent. And then, I'm a big fan of carries, let's throw some carries on there.
Carries?
Yep, just like a farmer carry.
It's a fun carry.
Yep.
Oh.
Have a weight in one hand,
Carry those things around the
a
gym.
weight in the other, just have you walk a good
3 laps
good
around.
amount of distance.
Really? So just carrying them
Yep.
will help build that.
Yeah, so from the top, again, we have, bench press, row, overhead pressing, bench dip, tricep extension.
Flexors.
Then we have plank, we have, reverse crunches, and then we have a farmer carry. So from that, we already have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You already have 8 exercises you can do. That's a pretty good amount to start with.
Yeah, one of each.
So for like the first session, you just go one set of like 8 to 15 reps and then call it good. So the further you get down the list, have to add more reps, less weight. Over time, you can go back to your 2 for 2 rule. And then for each exercise and each weight, so let's say you get a couple more reps per session at that given weight, just add more weight next time. Keep your reps the same. You can go up reps again, add more weight. Kind of takes care of itself.
Start somewhere.
Yeah. Thanks. last one.
Yeah.
Last one is just playing, like that could be, I put these into different kind of categories. You have unstructured, just running, jumping, tumbling. Anything that you're just out kind of playing around. These are kind of practicing foundational movement skills, like you're already getting in kind of a squat position. We're doing handstands. I mean, every kid should be able to do a handstand according to NSCA. I mean, anything you can think of. It's speed tag, it could be kind of whatever you can imagine. Just throw a ball in the field, let kids figure it out too. They'll come up with all sorts of interesting rules. Good. Then we get more into structured games, regarding strategy and rules. This could be something as simple as kickball, really. Soccer. I mean, you get into more Gaelic football where you have to run a couple feet and then bounce a ball, and it's going to get into more kind of motor tasks, more interesting motor tasks, coordination. And then you get more into small-sided games, which is kind of the more fun one. So with this is going to develop more sport-based conditioning as well as skill development. So in a study by Arslan et al., if you can actually, let's say you're using soccer, for example, instead of using a full-size pitch that's 11 on 11, you can kind of break the field to about a fifth of the size and have it be 3-on-3. And you're making the game so much faster that you're kind of creating a conditioning response like we talked about earlier. So in addition to working on the sports skill, they're actually getting in much better shape. And it's pretty similar to like high intensity interval training without actually having to put them in the gym setting. So it's actually more fun to have kids play, but you have to kind of create the environment that allows them to play at a faster rate. Okay. So, I mean, just the effective play is huge depending on which mode you want to do. If you want to do, yeah, that's kind of the main thing. If you're going to play, enjoy it. And that's why I play dodgeball. I get to run around, jump, throw stuff. It's great. And if I check my web band, I've already burned like 600 calories. It's awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, so that's kind of it. So it's, like, you have the ability, I mean, you have some of the information, there's volumes and volumes of info out there just on things like Garrison, but you have a pretty good idea of what you need to be doing. You've already made your own workout, the first one, okay? And from those things, if you just switch those movements, say, instead of starting with the chest press, you go to like an incline press, or you just kind of superset stuff, you've already made a pretty good repertoire of things. So as long as you're willing to kind of play around with variables, the amount of exercise routines you can do is kind of limitless. On my profile on our, I think it's on the internet now, I have a randomizer of several hundred exercises, so it'll give you thousands of workout combinations. So we have the access, we have some of the information, you have the ability to write your own stuff, and it's in your hands now. If you have any questions, hit me.
You know.
What's that?
Did you say hit me with your questions?
Yeah. It's
Mine are a bit more specific than what you're doing with these people, but I just like to listen in on these things because I've been helped very much by a physiatrist help with me, and your physio I've been going to for a couple of years now, so I've got specific problems, but I'm amazed at what I can do. I'm 86, and I'm able to look after myself and live on off the grid without any help after cancer, chemo, stroke, all business.
yeah.
And I'm still going, but I was athletic before I had any problems. But you're dealing more with people that are really healthy, so I just have to learn to pace myself. And I've been to, you've heard of this, senior groups, and I got a lot out of that. Very helpful, great community here for outreaching people that want to stay healthy as long as they can.
Yeah.
I really appreciate Elder Hospital being here for that reason. It's been great, because otherwise I wouldn't have any idea how to recover from, wheelchair, you'll never walk again. The whole business, it's not true, it isn't true, don't believe it, you just have to keep moving. And it's not that I can say that I'm doing that all the time, but at least I'm aware that if you can keep moving and pace yourself and regulate that, what exercise you can do.
Yeah.
I've had cerebellar involvement, so I have problems with balance coordination and those kind of things. So I tried to work a jump rope the other day. I just decided, because I've been testing myself with jumping, and I had no idea that I used to be able to jump rope, right? No, I couldn't go and do that again. So I get the rope up in the air and I'm putting it, and the brain couldn't get the muscles or the legs to jump at the right time. So I'm way delayed, and I had no idea that I was so out of sync, or that it takes me after those conditions a lot longer to be able to get the body to move itself. So I have to really, really adjust everything that I'm learning as far as exercising, physiotherapy, all those things. But I had great help from the physiatrist.
Who did you see?
Huh?
Who did you see?
I saw a lady up in Olympia called.
Nolager? Margot Nolager?
Say again?
Margot Nolager?
No.
Lauren?
She works at the cancer.
Okay.
On College Street, there's a cancer place there, rehabilitation.
Yeah.
She works in there. I can't remember her name now, but she's really
Good. I'm glad you worked out good.
But I wasn't getting anywhere with the doctors, or they couldn't see that I had specific problems that I had to work through, and she just nailed it.
Good.
So that I could keep moving, and that started me on being able to keep going. So anyway, but I appreciate hearing what you're doing. It's very interesting, because I used to be a runner, and I used to be a basketball player and all this stuff, but then I couldn't do any of it. I had to just go back to being a kid again and learning how to pace myself. That's been a journey. It's been an interesting journey. But I can see that if the young people, or not so young, around here could follow some of your instructions, they could definitely elongate their life.
I mean, it's all scalable. So
And it's not about living longer, it's about living without, living healthily longer.
what's the duration if there's not quality there?
Yeah, that's what I heard. So these programs that Sylvia's doing for the seniors, and we also, it's like it's helpful in other ways, just in communication.
Oh, for sure.
A lot of other ways. We had great sort of little social things going on between us, and fun, and we did a lot of fun with Sylvia, and it was great. I like it. I'm going to try to keep it up as much as I can. Anything I can do to keep moving, and just making sure I know that it's not going to damage the body to overdo it. So I have to start with slow, like you do, like normally, right? That's how you do your exercise, starting it and building up. And,
Responsibly pushing. Any questions?
I don't think so.
Great, thank you.
Oh. Thank you.